Hey, it's Moe Ari
and Tiffany.
And you're listening to the #Love Goals podcast. Before we get into this episode, I just want you to remember that every human, regardless of identity, needs these three things: belonging, authenticity, and love.
And after a decade of partnership, we've learned to co-create these things and so much more.
So from wherever you're listening, we're going to go on a journey of becoming our own #Love Goals. Now let's get into this episode. Hey, it's Moe Ari
and Tiffany.
Welcome to the #Love Goals podcast. Today's episode is about long distance relationships. So Tiffany and I were in a long distance relationship for a good chunk of the beginning of our courtship, if you will. And, you know, she was in grad school in New York and I was in grad school in Chicago. Yeah. And we somehow found a way to make it work. So insofar as we're here talking to you all, so something worked out with that. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to have this episode so we could really just talk about long distance relationships. I think they get a bad rap.
They do.
People, or a bad rep. I think that's what it is. Reputation.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So they get a bad reputation. I think people often think about long distance relationships and I think that they look down on them or they think they couldn't possibly work. Right. And our story is a real testament to how it can work, how it can be very fruitful, how it can really lead to some deep intimacy. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to talk about how that occurs and maybe our experience, and hopefully we leave something positive with you or hopeful if you're in a long distance relationship or you're curious about them. Yeah. So let's just jump right on in. Mm-hmm. Our relationship started in 2012. Was it 2012 or 2013?
2014. 14.
The numbers are funny.
I think we started our friendship like 2012, but relationship 2014. It was my first year of grad school.
Got it. Okay, so then that means that our friendship started long distance.
Yes.
And then our relationship formed over a long distance spatial component as well. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you just tell our story then, because I'm funny on numbers and me trying to think back is like very, very hard.
Yeah, so I think you're right that our friendship started long distance, so maybe about 2 years, and then we transitioned into a romantic relationship in 2014, and then we didn't fully live together until I graduated in 2016. So like the first 4 years of...
And it might have been 2017.
Yeah.
Like January.
Right. It was 2017. Right. So it was like the first 4 to 5 years of us knowing each other was from a long distance space.
Yeah.
That was our foundation.
Absolutely.
And so we moved in together 2017 and then have lived together consistently since that time. So we're going on 5 years.
Yeah, so we've officially finally been together in the same space longer than we've been long distance. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a good feeling.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's been quite the journey. Sometimes I forget about the long distance part of our relationship being on the other side. But when I start to put myself back in that space, I'm like, oh, mm-hmm. Yeah, we did that. Yeah. It was a thing, and it was kind of challenging.
Kind of.
Yeah, it was challenging. And I have a lot of friends that have been like, how did y'all do it? Like, that's really hard. I could never imagine myself being in a long distance relationship, let alone the distance itself. Like, we were like 1,000 miles apart, right? Yeah. Not like 2 hours where you could jump in the car and drive. Like, it was by plane that we could see each other. And so people often ask me, how did y'all do it? Like, what does it take to make that work? Any ideas on like...
What?
Yeah, like, what would you say made it work for us? I mean, because I know it's different based on the couple, but if you could think about like tools or like standards or principles, right?
Yeah.
To really make those long distance relationships work.
I guess I would start with the biggest one being communication. I think we're both really high on communication. We would spend a lot of time talking on the phone and asking each other deep questions too. We weren't just passing time like doing laundry and talking. Some of that was that. But the majority of the time we were talking, we were being very intentional about getting to know one another, about, we'd go watch, episodes of the same TV show and debrief about it. Like we did a lot of things that you'd get to do when you were in the same space. We did them separately, but we would talk about them and break them down. Kind of like how a book club is. You still feel like you're building intimacy or you have a shared experience because you really talked about it after. So I would say that's a way of looking at how communication works in a long distance relationship. You might not be doing everything simultaneously. But when you are exploring similar things, there's this really, really nice component of integration or coming together that you do when you're in a long distance relationship that I think really builds on intimacy in a very intentional way that we're not always participating in when we're right there next to each other. So communication, I'd say, is where I'd start.
Yeah. And I think you, at some point during our relationship, you found like this game that you play through your phone, right? Where you ask each other questions back and forth, and you would answer a question and then I had to answer a question, but not being in the same space where we were like sitting down in front of a deck of cards, answering questions, was challenging, but we found a way to be able to do that, like through just your phone. And I think I learned a lot about you through those questions. I don't remember the name of that game or app, but I think, like you're saying, with communication, if you're not always in the same room with the person, there are alternatives. And I think that was a really helpful tool for us too in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm like, I did that. Now there are so many things that I think help to build on communication. So of course, the advances in technology have made this really, really nice because there are so many ways you can video communicate now, where you can feel like you're really with that person. You can see their face, which I think really makes long distance dating now different than it was probably 30 years ago. And so I'm grateful for that. That made communication much easier. I want to say too, the things that are better about communication in a long distance relationship is that you have to be so intentional about time and setting aside the time to talk. Sometimes we're in the same physical space. We might go to a movie, but that doesn't mean we're talking about it. We might be going to do experiences together and be bonding over being in the same physical space and doing an experience. But that integration or that communication or that coming together has to be intentional. And we don't always do that when we're sharing the same physical space. We can go to having sex as a way of expressing that we had a great time. When you're on the phone and you're in a long distance relationship, you have to say that out loud. I think it builds vulnerability. I feel like so much of our beginning part of our relationship was the I love yous and the, oh, I miss you so much. I feel like so much of that relationship was the I'm just in pain when I'm not with you. All of the affection possible, right? Like everything you could communicate about love, we were doing it. And I think that it's a benefit. It's a positive. I think when we're in the same space, we can kind of forget to say that. And I realized that recently. I went on a solo little vacation. Like, I need a break, right? I'm thinking I need so much time. And as soon as I get there, I start feeling this longing to be with Tiffany and Nova, our daughter. And this real like, oh my gosh, this is what I felt when I was in that long distance part of our relationship. And so what it did for me was remind me of how far we've come. And remind me of how special it is to when we spend time together. And I had to be so accountable for not always being as intentional when we share space. And when I was away, it really brought to my awareness just how vulnerable I was back then with you and how I've changed. So it's like, I have to be accountable for that. As many times as I want to focus on you and how you're not always vulnerable, I have to be accountable for how I'd show up so differently being in the same space and being in the same house than when we were long distance.
And I think this is an aha moment for me too. Like when I really think about that period of time in our relationship, the intentionality really does cause you to be more vulnerable. Like when I think about presently now, the moments where I'm like, well, why am I really leaning in? Like some part of that intentionality is not there. It's not that I don't have the desire, right, to be intentional, but like when you have to physically pick up the phone and call a person and talk about your day, that's very different from like coming home from work and like just being in the same room with them, like it's a different level of leaning in. And so I'm like sitting here like, like I do definitely see the pattern of how, our relationship has evolved and transitioned and how, there's certain moments where I feel like I haven't always leaned in, but that intentionality like was so foundational to our relationship.
Absolutely. I think being long distance kept me on my toes and made me more curious.
Yeah.
I'm not a part of your every single minute of the day, or I'm not a part of, your process for grocery shopping or anything like that. It made me care about the mundane a lot more. I was curious about everything. Okay, what did you make for dinner? Because I don't know. I'm not there. And there are so many questions we fill in the blank to when we live together.
Yeah.
I'm not as curious as I was, but curiosity is a foundational part of intimacy that sustains it long term. So I really am glad we're talking about these positives around long distance. As much as we're going to get into, I'm sure, the challenges, the positives have been astronomical.
Yeah.
I think the positives helped us to build a solid foundation for our relationship. So many of us come to relationships with different attachment styles from childhood.
Yeah.
I've not always been the most leaned in. I've been a little bit of an avoidant attachment kind of person.
That's her life.
So long distance allowed me the ability to move slowly, to build trust over time, to really get to know you for you, listen to you. I'm not distracted by what you're wearing or all of the things that you're doing inside of the same space. I'm really listening to you intently when we're long distance. And I got to know you at your heart. I wasn't lacking any clarity. I wasn't confused about who you are because I had really gotten to witness you like you were my favorite character in a book, It's different when you are on the outside of someone's life and you're getting to know them. You notice such special things about them that are so simple, but they're meaningful when you're on the outside versus when you spend time with them every day.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that I would say the same thing. It's been so foundational. So for the moments, when we did transition to living together, where it has been challenges with leaning in, then because that foundation was set, it makes it feel like, okay, like I know at the heart of this, at the root of this, I know this person, I'm curious in this way, and you can lean back on that. That's not to say that it has to be a long distance relationship for you to have that foundation, but for us, I really valued that, and I think it was important for us to have in the beginning.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, yes, so important. And I'm thinking so much right now about just how much that missing. So we're talking about vulnerability and it brings up this, like how often I had to say, I miss you. That is a very vulnerable thing to say, right? We could act like we're okay and we're not okay. I was a wreck. Like she would go back to New York. I was like boo crying.
And I was on the plane looking out the window, boo hoo crying.
It was like, wow, what is this feeling? I've never felt this before. I would be breaking down crying. Like, I do not know why. I think one time I called my therapist, like, why is this happening? And she's probably just as confused as I was. Because I had just never experienced that before. So just talking about the missing another person is extremely vulnerable. And I think that is one of the challenges people do not want to face with long distance relationship. So oftentimes we'll lean out of having a long distance relationship.
Right.
But that missing someone is so intense. It brings up these feelings around grief. If you've ever had a loved one pass away, an ancestor pass away, then you know what that feeling is when someone you love gets on a plane and goes to another city. That breakdown. It doesn't stop happening now. For a while. It helps when you know that they're going to come back and win.
Right.
But when I tell you, it feels like losing someone.
It really does. It really does. Like landing back I most often landed at LaGuardia Airport, and I would, as soon as the wheels would hit the ground, I would be like, "Oh, back to this again by myself." And it was heartbreaking. I mean, I'm full on tears sometimes on the plane because it literally felt like I left my heart in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
So
That's so sweet.
yeah.
I feel like I think I told you, I was like, I feel like my heart is walking around New York. Yeah. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges that come up about long distance relationship. When people say, how do you do it? It's because that feeling, like they don't want to feel that feeling. They're like, how did you endure that feeling? And I'm not going to say that it wasn't hard. It was very, very challenging.
Yeah.
But it is just a feeling. And what we were creating was so much more important than that feeling.
Yeah.
I'm so happy that I was willing to risk it all for the opportunity to be in this relationship because it's transformed me in so many ways. And I think about, what if I hadn't leaned in? What if I said I could never do a long distance relationship? I think the major moral of the story, if there was a takeaway, is like, with the right relationship, you can do anything.
Yeah.
Long distance, whatever the type of relationship it is, you can make it work.
Yeah.
This really transcends just long distance relationships. With the right relationship, anything is possible. If you have a dream of something you want to create with your partner, or a way that you want to live the life you want to create together, you can have it. You just have to be creative about how it's going to happen. We didn't know, but we were like, we want to be together, so we're going to do it. Let's throw in the fact that we were also queer, coming out as queer. I hadn't transitioned yet, so we were coming out as like I guess a lesbian relationship, even though that term never really fit for me or you.
Or me, though.
But to the rest of the world, we are now having to come out. From southern Orangeburg, South Carolina. And, from a very beautiful Black Christian family. And I'm from Chicago. And from a very beautiful Black Christian family. And so that coming out process also meant other challenges. And we weren't with each other every day to endure those challenges together. So we were having to come out with our families, but in together, but not physically together. So I couldn't go on her shoulder and cry if I was meeting a challenge. And you couldn't do that to me. You called me, but I couldn't put my arm around you. So I think that was also significant. It shored up inside of us some of this independent work that we had to do as well, which I think sometimes we can avoid in relationship by focusing on the relationship. But long distance didn't allow us to do that. So today we have the benefit of having beautiful, celebratory, supportive families that are constantly working to evolve and allyship. But we had to do that hard work. And I think it started in this foundation that we created around long distance, where we were committed to doing the work regardless. We want to be together. We've already overcome enough. We're going to be out together now. Our families are going to celebrate us. They adore our daughter. Like, they get my pronoun. Like, we have done this work, but it started in this long distance relationship commitment and being like, I don't care what the statistics say or how people say this is hard. We're going to get creative and we're going to figure it out, because we're not going to let that keep us from one another. If we already had distance be a separator, we're not going to let anything else separate us. And I think that that's been our mentality.
Yeah. And I think I'm realizing right now, like in this very moment, how important it was to have that time to do the independent work, right? Like, it's not to say our independent work has stopped, but I don't know that to the degree I did internal work or you did internal work, that would have happened if we were together in the same space. Right? Like, I don't think so.
Knowing myself and the way I feel about you.
I don't think so.
No, it helped us to not be fused, like so enmeshed, where we just became a part of something else after leaving our family. It's like, not that we became part of something else, but we lost our identity. Like, we're in that pivotal point of around being like 20 to 25, where you're now finding your space in the world. You're finally being like, I didn't like that stuff that happened in my childhood. And you're letting your voice be heard and you're forming your own identity. What if during that time period, we're like, we're going to go be a part of something else and not have our own identity?
Absolutely.
So it was so important that we had that time.
It was very important. I think in many moments, I probably described it as myself feeling forced to do the work, but I'm so grateful for that time. And I think, you added that we were queer, like added that into the equation. We were also in grad school, so that meant very fixed budgets and incomes, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't like I could be in Chicago every weekend. Not poor.
It was not.
I mean, it was borderline poor. As a grad,
borderline. I was under the wage for the poverty line. Okay.
Absolutely. In New York City, like exorbitantly expensive.
Wow.
So it wasn't like I could be like, okay, I'm coming to Chicago every weekend. No, it was like you really had to plan it. It was like every month, sometimes every 6 weeks, or even, sometimes more spaced out than that. So like we're in a long distance relationship. We're queer, going through the coming out process in separate geographical locations.
Yeah.
Also, not really having a ton of money to be able to see each other all the time. So, like, you definitely was forced to do your work.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we had no choice.
No choice whatsoever.
Yeah. Okay, so because we did that work, and we worked through those challenges, we really absorbed the benefits of the long distance relationship. When we finally did come together and we were going to start living together, it wasn't that didn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
And it wasn't cohesive overnight. When you start living with someone after you've been living by yourself, forming this beautiful identity that's independent, doing your own work, which is the foundation for any successful relationship, your self-work. Once you've done all of that, coming together with someone after you've been long distance is another intentional process. So we should probably talk about that. Let's think about 2017, right? I'm in my parents' house. They're so beautifully helping me figure out my next step and allowing me the space to live with them so that I could figure out what is it that I want to do next, because I had some opportunities fall through that were really sad for me. Definitely like a rock bottom for me. I was very, very devastated by not getting some opportunities that I had lined up. Hillary didn't win the election. It was a lot of stuff.
A lot happened.
Tiffany had been interviewing after grad school I think you interviewed for a year. From 2016 of June to May of 2017 for opportunities. And mind you, just throwing out there, Tiffany went to Columbia in the city of New York. That is an Ivy League school for her master's. And she went to Emory for undergrad. This woman is educated. And she could not get a job.
No.
So she comes to live with me. My parents are like, well, y'all are both doing the same thing. They love Tiffany. We live with them for like 5 months. Tiffany gets a job. Beautiful. I'm still doing therapy. I joined another private practice. I'm doing therapy. Or I joined a university.
Right.
And I was doing work. So we moved into our own place. Finally, after living with my parents. And I think that's when we started some work around merging our lives together. We had one car. We're rocking. We're rock affiliate. Okay. Still not, but like getting better. So we had one car. We moved into our really nice apartment in Hyde Park. I will say, I love that space so much.
To this day.
We had a little patio grill area. We was doing it.
Oh man, I love that place.
And Hyde Park is a beautiful little mecca for people of color and queer folk, and I just love it.
Yeah. And before we even move to like the getting our own space, back to the conversation about vulnerability, even in the time when I lived with you, with your parents, I think I had been going through a lot, right? Like I graduated from this great institution, looking for jobs, getting rejection after rejection after rejection. That's kind of painful, right?
Right.
I was really upset. And I think even in that time of living with your parents, I had to lean on you, right? Like I was devastated a lot of times by some of the positions that I didn't get. And so I started noticing that challenge with me leaning in, there being in the same space with you, because it was like, okay, I'm getting rejected. You're literally right here. I can't just be like, okay, I'm gonna call you back later, right? I had to literally be like, okay, babe, this thing is coming up for me. I'm feeling really sad. And like, I feel like that was the intro into like, oh snap, like we in the same space. I actually got to talk about what's happening for me.
Yeah.
And be way more intentional about it, just as I was when we were long distance. And so then I think moving in together, then, you know, you get more into the mundane things, right? You learn about like how we do chores, like how you wash clothes versus how I wash clothes, right?
I would just like the record to reflect it's okay to put all your colors together.
It's not.
When you're on a
But
budget.
each his own. Okay. Well,
on a budget.
that is very true. That is very true.
But I had to learn when I got my apartment with a washer and dryer in grad school that, you know, it's not college anymore. So you don't have to put them all together.
It's not. Yeah. And also you can squeeze the toothpaste all the way to the end and not from the middle. But, you know, I digress.
Yeah, it really does.
So, yeah, you learn more about those mundane things. And I continue to have to do the work around leaning in emotionally. But I would say that us living together, I had never lived with anyone outside of the context of it being my parents or my siblings or a roommate, right? So I'm like, oh, this is this person that like I share space with. We do things together. We're romantically involved. Okay, I can't just like go to the room and shut my door, right?
No. I mean, you can.
I could, right? But for us, that's not what we wanted or not what I wanted. And I don't think that's what you wanted either. So I feel like I had to come face to face with continue to have to do so, but face to face with my tendency to distance. Might I dare say.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for naming that. The tendency toward distance. So like I guess what you're highlighting is that it was just as vulnerable moving in together. And the things that maybe you're less activated by when you're separate.
Yeah.
Or your tendencies toward distance or, you know, even just needing more space, they can be more activated when someone is in your physical space.
Absolutely.
So like if you maybe were used to relying on me when something was happening in New York as your escape away from New York.
Exactly.
Then being in the same space while you're having those challenges doesn't make you want to lean into me because I'm a part of that environment for you.
Exactly.
So the long distance going from being like that person's refuge from the space that they're in to being a part of that space was a necessary pivot, right?
Yes.
There's no escapism in a long-term committed partnership.
It's not. And I remember using that word specifically. Whenever I would come to Chicago from New York, oh, this is my refuge. But, you know, little retreat situation. Then I could go back to the challenges or whatever I was dealing with in New York. But
well, because also our apartments in our living situations for grad school were completely different. I lived with my sister in this really nice condo in South Loop that had these beautiful wall to ceiling, floor to ceiling windows and the high loft style brick. And she was in an apartment in New York. On campus, but he had bugs when I went. It just wasn't the best situation.
It was not.
You know, so there is a reason why you had set up your feelings around the relationship as a refuge.
Right.
Just not just about your emotional connection to me, but the physical surrounding.
Exactly.
So now we're in an apartment that we both really love with those floor to ceiling windows and the loft style brick, and we got a patio and we have parties and we invite people over. That doesn't stop still being the emotional space you're in, which is like, Moe is my refuge, but now he's a part of this environment with me. This is a lot. And I'm imagining you didn't even know how to get that particular need met, which was a break from any problems that were in the present.
Exactly.
And it probably taught you how to navigate that, I imagine.
Absolutely. I definitely feel like at every step of our relationship, I feel like we've had to get creative, right? So when we're long distance, I had to be creative about being intentional. When we're in the same space and my refuge is also in the same space, I have to get creative about then how I interact with you or engage with you. It might not look the same way. And so I was like, you know what? I have some struggles with vulnerability. I have some struggles with even sharing what's happening for me. I think I need to go to therapy and have some support and some tools on how to live in the same space.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like hell every day, but I knew I wanted to show up differently.
Yeah.
I wanted to be vulnerable. I wanted to share my voice. And I did not feel like I had the tools at the time. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to seek this resource.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Good job. Good job doing the therapy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think quite often in our community, you know, we don't always seek support for relationships. And I think whether you're in a long distance relationship or any kind of relationship, therapy is a really viable support system for your relationship. Think about just getting tender love and unconditional love and care for your relationship. Think of it as that space you can go to, not just when something is in crisis, but as a place to check in.
Right.
And so I think I would have utilized that even more as we were trying to build that foundation together, starting this life together.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of other things that were difficulty or added difficulty, or maybe were a benefit to us when we were starting that process of merging our lives together. I will say we started to build community. We started to have people over in our space and entertain people in our space. We were able to go on more dates or have dates at home. We were doing a lot of things we couldn't do before. And so all of that was like having our love start over again.
Yeah.
And I think that was regenerative. So but we also had to lean into that.
Right.
Because we could have just focused on the challenges that we were being faced with. But we found our way of leaning into the vulnerability by dating again.
Yeah.
We never got to do that really on a consistent basis.
Right.
And so, you know, we were doing that up.
We were. And we also I had gotten a job, right, in Chicago. And so there was a little bit more resources available, right? So with the dating, we got to go on trips together. Like outside of this point, I was coming to Chicago. Like that was the thing we were doing, which was amazing. Chicago is like one of the most beautiful cities ever.
Oh, thank you so much.
But we also had the opportunity to go to Denver, right?
Yeah.
Go to Niagara Falls, do these things that felt like a co-creative space that we never had done together.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really great experience, right?
Yeah.
Even having an apartment together, it was like, okay, this is new for both of us. What are we going to do in this space to create the life or the environment that we want, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that those were such intentional conversations, even where we wanted to live in the city. It was an intentional conversation.
Yeah.
And the fact that we love that place together, I still think of it so fondly. You know, I'd probably be trying to have Nova in there, 2 little bedroom place, because we just loved it so much. That really was important. So we're choosing where you want to live together. Don't move to a city you both hate. Really let that space where you merge your lives, if you can, be a bubble. Let it be somewhere that you really love, that you know is going to enrich the challenges you already know are going to come. When you're trying to merge a life, this goes for anyone.
Anybody.
People that didn't used to live together that are now getting married and then living together. This goes for you too. Try to be as intentional as possible about where you're moving together.
Right.
So whether it is that you both like that home or that living situation, whether it's that you both like that state or physical location.
Exactly.
Let that be your bubble. Make a bubble. Be intentional about it. Do not move somewhere that you don't like. If it's going to be that you're having to move for work to somewhere you don't like, don't let that be the chapter where you also decide to get married and do all these other things.
Say it louder for the people in the back.
That's just my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think all of those things are so important. And it's so specific to the couple, right?
Yeah.
For us, that felt like Hyde Park in Chicago. For some people, that might be the countryside of I don't know.
It could be traveling.
Right. It could be traveling. So whatever are the principles that are reflected in your relationship, where you see yourself, where you are dreaming of seeing yourself, I think is important. Even down to the neighborhood, you know, how you want your place to look, what you want in your space, what vibe are you going for?
Absolutely.
I think it's really important, and it creates togetherness, or it creates an opportunity for you all to co-create, because so much of your lives before that, while you were in relationship, was like, I got my apartment, you got yours.
Yeah.
This is how it's decorated here. This is the vibe there.
Yeah. Wow. Beautiful. Yeah. I think you're bringing up so many beautiful points, like just really, really good stuff about how we can intentionally have relationship. And so I think we'll pause our conversation there. We should keep at this conversation around long distance, because I think we could even talk about how to have a long distance relationship come together into forming a union. Maybe you didn't even have that time to live together before that, like we did. So there are a lot of follow-ups we could have to this, but I think this has been a really good conversation. You've really reminded me of some things I had forgotten. I feel like a sweetness kind of settling into my spirit now, thinking about those times, probably feeling a little emotional. Okay,
I'm definitely feeling emotional.
Me too. Got teary-eyed.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, well, okay. But also just feeling so grateful for that time. I think every time we can sometimes avoid this conversation because it was a very emotional space. But every time we have this conversation, I learn something new. Like I had this aha moment, like, oh, that was what was happening. And so I'm just grateful for the space to be able to talk about it. And like, I'm just grateful.
Yeah.
So grateful.
Yeah, I feel the same exact way. Stay tuned for more episodes and like updates from us. We're going to pause our session there. This has been #LoveGoals with Moe Ari
and Tiffany.
See you all next time.
Bye. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe.
If you want your question featured in an upcoming episode of the #LoveGoals podcast, go ahead and send your question to lovegoalspodcast@gmail.com. Check out our website at lovegoalspodcast.com and follow us on Instagram at lovegoalspodcast. We look forward to hearing from you soon.